Alexandria Zoo, where it all began. You remember that?
Yes. Remember, last time we came here, it was just me and you. I was pregnant with Kate. We was on the train.
Y'all, the fish, they sold out of the fish food. They can only eat so much or they're going to end up like me.
Blood-soaked towels scattered across pristine hotel carpet. Yellow police tape cordoning off the first-floor hallway of the Hampton Inn and Suites in Macomb, Mississippi. A discarded pillow, stained crimson, lies abandoned near what investigators would later mark as evidence. This wasn't a scene from a movie. This was the aftermath of a horrific act of domestic violence that shocked a community on June 21, 2023. Hotel guests peered from behind partially opened doors as medical personnel rushed 2 stretchers through the corridor, one carrying a 27-year-old mother fighting for her life, the other transporting her husband, a 25-year-old pastor who had just committed the unthinkable. In the corner, 3 small children huddled together, their eyes wide with terror, having witnessed something no child should ever see. Their father shooting their mother twice before turning the gun on himself. Before I reveal what led to this horrific scene, take a moment to subscribe to Explosive True Crime Stories. Your support helps us bring awareness to these important cases and potentially save lives. Hit that notification bell too, because understanding the warning signs of domestic violence could help someone you know. Gabrielle Prenell appeared to have it all. A devoted husband who adored her, 3 beautiful children, and the respected position of being married to the senior pastor of Bright Morning Star Missionary Baptist Church in Pineville, Louisiana. On social media, Danny Prenell Jr. portrayed himself as the perfect family man, regularly posting loving tributes to his queen and sharing smiling family photos that radiated happiness. I'm proud to be your husband because you are a woman of class, discretion, integrity, and most importantly, you're a woman of God. He wrote just months before the shooting, claiming he owed his life to her. At only 25, Danny was considered wise beyond his years, becoming the church's senior pastor in January 2022 after previously serving as a deputy with the Rapides Parish Sheriff's Office. The young couple seemed to embody the American dream, faith, family, and community service, all wrapped into one picture-perfect package. But behind closed doors, a completely different reality existed. While Danny preached about love and forgiveness from the pulpit, Gabrielle endured years of brutal physical abuse and death threats. The facade of the perfect pastor's family masked a dangerous truth that would eventually erupt in violence so severe it would leave both of them hospitalized and their children traumatized. At approximately 3:30 in the afternoon on that fateful June day, guests at the Hampton Inn and Suites reported hearing gunshots. What police discovered was devastating. Danny Prenell Jr. had shot his wife Gabrielle twice, once in the abdomen and once in her arm, before turning the gun on himself, inflicting a single gunshot wound to his own abdomen. Most horrifying of all, their 3 young children witnessed the entire violent episode, watching helplessly as their father attacked their mother. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, finding Gabrielle critically injured. She was immediately airlifted to the University of Mississippi Medical Center in Jackson, fighting for her life as doctors worked desperately to save her. Danny, whose self-inflicted wound was less severe, was treated and quickly released into police custody. Meanwhile, the 3 traumatized children were taken into the care of Mississippi Child Protective Services, their innocence shattered by witnessing a level of violence that no child should ever experience.
He gonna make sense. See, you still tripping because you lost your job. You still tripping and disappointed and mad because y'all broke up and you don't understand it. And you still driving by his house checking to see if there's another car there. You still hurt. You still in your feelings. You still all on Facebook telling your mama, telling your daddy, telling everybody how he hurt you. You still see things for where they are now. But tell somebody, just hang on a little while and live a little bit longer, and it's going to all make sense. When he get exposed, it's going to all make sense why God didn't want you with him.
Last night, 2 people, including the pastor of Bright Morning Star Missionary Baptist Church, Danny Purnell Jr., were taken to the hospital after a shooting at a hotel in Macomb, Mississippi.
But to understand how a pastor could shoot his wife in front of their children, we need to go back to the warning signs that were ignored, the protection orders that failed, and the years of abuse hidden behind scripture quotes and family photos. Gabrielle's story didn't begin with gunshots in a hotel hallway. Before she became known as the pastor's wife, Gabrielle was a young woman with dreams and aspirations of her own. Growing up in Louisiana, friends described her as kind-hearted and deeply faithful, someone who always put others before herself. She had a warm smile that could light up a room and a genuine compassion that drew people to her. By her early 20s, Gabrielle had established herself as a dedicated member of her church community, participating in various outreach programs and youth ministries. Those who knew Gabrielle before her marriage recall her vibrant spirit and determination. She had plans for education and hoped to work with children, possibly in teaching or counseling. Family was always important to her, and she often spoke of her desire to create a loving home filled with faith and stability, perhaps seeking to build the kind of nurturing environment that would reflect her own values and beliefs. Little did she know that her dream of a faith-centered family would eventually become the backdrop for unimaginable trauma. Danny Purnell Jr. cultivated an image of a young man on a meteoric rise through both secular and religious leadership.
He ties Isaac up, and he lays him on the wood.
Oh, yes, he is.
Abraham grabs the knife, and he's getting ready to kill his son like God has told him to.
Oh, yes, he is.
And Sarah's baby is out of her sight.
Before becoming a pastor, he served as a deputy with the Rapides Parish Sheriff's Office, positioning himself as someone who upheld both the law and moral authority in his community. His colleagues described him as charismatic and confident, qualities that would later serve him well in the pulpit. Danny resigned from his law enforcement position in December 2022, just as his church leadership role was expanding. His appointment as senior pastor of Bright Morning Star Missionary Baptist Church in January 2022 marked a significant achievement for someone so young. At just 25 years old, Danny was often praised for wisdom beyond his years, a phrase he himself referenced in social media posts. He leveraged his youth as an asset, connecting with younger congregants while earning the respect of church elders through his passionate sermons and apparent devotion to Scripture. His rapid ascension in church leadership created an aura of divine favor around him. On social media, the Purnells were the epitome of #BlessedFamily. Danny's Facebook page served as a carefully curated showcase of their seemingly perfect life, smiling family portraits, inspirational scripture quotes, and frequent public declarations of love for his queen. In April 2023, just months before the shooting, he posted a birthday tribute to Gabrielle. "I love you so much, and I'm grateful God has allowed you another year. I've watched your growth on all levels, and you're a great mother, wife, and my best friend." To their congregation at Bright Morning Star, they represented the ideal Christian family, young, devoted to each other, and raising their children in faith. Danny often incorporated his family into his sermons, using them as examples of God's blessings and the importance of family values. Church members described the couple as role models for younger married couples, with Danny frequently counseling others on maintaining a godly household. In the wider community of Pineville, Louisiana, the Purnells were respected figures. Danny's dual role as former law enforcement and current spiritual leader gave him significant standing. They attended community events together, participated in charity work, and maintained connections with local leaders.
Members of the Bright Morning Star Baptist Church in Pineville are shocked and saddened at the news that their lead pastor reportedly shot his wife in front of his 3 children before turning the in Mississippi. Church members met for their regular Friday prayer meeting, and I spoke with a few of the deacons who were not ready to go on camera until they knew more details about the incident. But they said that church members are devastated by the news and are in prayer for the family. Marvin Marzette Sr. lives close to the church and is astonished by the incident.
It's a shocker. Surprised the daylights out of me when I first heard about it, because from what I understood, he was a fine guy, a fine preacher. And I did hear him preach one time and enjoyed the sermon. So again, it was just very surprising that, to even hear that news, that he did that. I hope everything go well with them. I know they're in a lot of pain and stuff right now, suffering, and, I'm pretty sure it's unbelievable, that they father to do something like that. But again, just stay strong, believe in God.
Their 3 young children completed the picture of the perfect pastor's family: photogenic, well-behaved, and always present at church functions. No one looking at this carefully constructed public image could have imagined the violence occurring behind closed doors. The cracks in the Prenel's perfect facade began early in their relationship, though few outside their immediate circle noticed. Friends who were close to Gabriel occasionally observed concerning dynamics: Danny's need to control conversations, his insistence on speaking for his wife in social settings, and his subtle ways of isolating her from longtime friends. There were unexplained cancellations of plans and Gabriel's increasing reluctance to attend events without Danny present. More troubling were the physical signs that some chose to ignore. Gabrielle occasionally appeared with bruises she attributed to clumsiness or accidents around the house. Her once outgoing personality gradually became more reserved, especially in her husband's presence. Phone calls with friends became shorter and less frequent, often ending abruptly if Danny entered the room. Those who did express concern were met with defensive responses or complete denial, as Gabrielle had begun the pattern common among abuse victims: protecting her abuser while internalizing shame and blame for the situation. In 2016, the facade cracked publicly when Gabrielle filed a petition for protection from abuse in Rapides Parish. Her desperate words revealed the horrifying truth: "I've been constantly getting beaten by my husband, and I fear for the life of myself and my unborn child." She detailed how Danny frequently pointed guns at her and threatened to kill her. Despite Gabrielle's 2016 protection order, the documented abuse continued and intensified over the years. Court records revealed a disturbing pattern of escalating violence that followed classic domestic abuse progression. What began as verbal intimidation and controlling behavior evolved into physical assaults that became increasingly severe and frequent. Neighbors reported hearing shouting matches that would suddenly go silent, and on at least 3 occasions between 2017 and 2022, Gabrielle sought medical attention for injuries consistent with physical assault. One particularly alarming incident occurred in early 2020 when Gabrielle arrived at a local emergency room with fractured ribs and a concussion. Though she initially claimed to have fallen downstairs, a concerned nurse documented suspicions of domestic violence in her medical chart. When questioned separately from Danny, Gabrielle broke down but ultimately refused to press charges. The hospital filed a mandatory report, but without Gabrielle's cooperation, authorities could take limited action. By 2021, the violence had escalated to include weapons. A neighbor reported to police hearing Danny threaten Gabrielle with a gun during an argument, but when officers arrived, both denied any altercation had occurred. The children, then too young to articulate what they had witnessed, were already being conditioned to maintain the family's dark secret. Each incident reinforced Danny's sense of impunity. He was learning that his status as both a law enforcement officer and a pastor provided him with a protective shield against consequences. Experts in domestic violence recognize that victims remain in abusive relationships for complex psychological and practical reasons. For Gabrielle, these factors were compounded by religious expectations and community pressure. The cycle of tension, explosion, and reconciliation became a familiar pattern. After violent episodes, Danny would express profound remorse, often invoking God's forgiveness and promising change, temporarily becoming the loving husband Gabrielle desperately wanted to believe in. Financial dependence played a significant role in Gabrielle's inability to leave. With 3 young children and limited personal income, she faced the daunting prospect of starting over with minimal resources. Danny controlled their finances, monitoring spending and restricting her access to bank accounts, a common tactic among abusers to maintain control. Perhaps most powerful was the psychological manipulation Danny employed, convincing Gabrielle that she was responsible for provoking his anger and that exposing his behavior would destroy not only their family, but damage their church community. This combination of fear, hope, shame, and practical constraints created invisible chains that kept Gabrielle trapped in an increasingly dangerous situation. The stark contrast between Danny's public persona and private behavior represented a textbook case of compartmentalization common among abusers in positions of authority. On Sundays, he preached compassion, forgiveness, and family values with such conviction that congregants were moved to tears. He counseled couples on healthy relationships and spoke passionately about respecting women as God's precious creation. His sermons often specifically condemned violence, with one parishioner recalling him saying, "A man who raises his hand against his family has forgotten God's command to love as Christ loved the church." Yet within hours of delivering such messages, Danny would return home and transform into a completely different person, controlling, jealous, and violent. This psychological splitting allowed him to maintain his self-image as a man of God while compartmentalizing his abusive behavior as separate from his true self. The cognitive dissonance was profound but not uncommon among abusers who hold positions of moral authority. Danny's ability to switch between these personas made his behavior all the more confusing and devastating for Gabrielle, who constantly searched for consistency in the man she had married. Danny's position as a Rapides Parish Sheriff's deputy from 2019 until December 2022 added another troubling dimension to the abuse dynamic. His law enforcement role gave him intimate knowledge of how domestic violence cases were handled, including their limitations. He knew exactly what evidence would be required for charges, how to avoid leaving marks that would trigger mandatory reporting, and which colleagues might be sympathetic to a fellow officer. More disturbingly, his position gave him access to firearms and tactical training, as well as relationships with those who would investigate any reports Gabrielle might make. When she did attempt to report incidents, she often found herself speaking to Danny's colleagues or friends, creating an insurmountable barrier to receiving help. His resignation in December 2022 coincided with his increased church responsibilities, but removed none of the advantages his law enforcement connections provided. If you're finding this story as disturbing as I am, please hit like and share this video to raise awareness about domestic violence in seemingly perfect families. Your engagement helps us reach more people who might recognize these warning signs in their own relationships or those of loved ones. Subscribe now for more in-depth coverage. Domestic violence experts note that religious communities present unique challenges for abuse victims. Dr. Nancy Nason-Clark, who studies violence in religious contexts, explains that scriptural misinterpretations about submission and divorce can trap women in dangerous situations. Abusers often weaponize religious texts, using passages about wives submitting to husbands while conveniently ignoring directives for husbands to love sacrificially. She explains, religious victims like Gabrielle face additional barriers to seeking help: fear of being ostracized from their faith community, concerns about breaking covenant vows, and worry about damaging their church's reputation. When the abuser is a religious leader, these pressures intensify dramatically. Congregants and church leadership often unconsciously participate in enabling abuse by prioritizing the preservation of the family unit and the church's image over victim safety. The most dangerous aspect, according to experts, is that religious communities can inadvertently reinforce forgiveness without accountability, encouraging victims to reconcile with unrepentant abusers and placing them at continued risk. This pattern was clearly evident in the Prenell situation, where Danny's position as pastor created a nearly impenetrable barrier to intervention. The morning of June 21st, 2023 began like many others for the Prenell family. Surveillance footage from a gas station near their home in Pineville, Louisiana showed the family leaving around 9:30 that morning. Danny appeared calm, even smiling as he helped the children into their SUV. According to credit card records, they stopped for breakfast at a diner just outside of town before beginning the 2-hour drive to Macomb, Mississippi. What brought the family to Macomb remains unclear. Investigators would later speculate that Danny had planned to attend a regional church conference scheduled for the following day, though his name wasn't on the official attendee list. By early afternoon, the family had checked into the Hampton Inn and Suites, with desk staff recalling nothing unusual about their demeanor. A hotel employee remembered seeing Gabrielle and the children at the pool around 2 o'clock, while Danny reportedly made several phone calls from their room. The last peaceful moments of their family life were ticking away, though no one could have predicted the violence that would erupt just 90 minutes later. At approximately 3:15 that afternoon, guests in rooms adjacent to the Prenells reported hearing a heated argument. The voices grew increasingly loud, with a woman, presumably Gabrielle, heard pleading, "Think about the children, please." At 3:27, security cameras captured Gabrielle hurrying down the first-floor hallway with the 3 children following closely behind her. Danny emerged from their room seconds later, visibly agitated and carrying something partially concealed beneath his jacket. What happened next was pieced together from witness statements and forensic evidence. In the hallway, just outside room 115, Danny confronted Gabrielle. Hotel guests reported hearing her cry out, "Don't do this," followed immediately by 2 distinct gunshots. Danny had fired his personal handgun, not his former service weapon, striking Gabrielle once in the abdomen and once in her right arm as she attempted to shield herself. As she collapsed to the floor, the children screamed in terror. In the chaotic moments that followed, Danny turned the gun on himself, firing a single shot into his own abdomen. A hotel maintenance worker who rushed to the scene after hearing the gunshots described finding both adults bleeding on the hallway floor, with the 3 children huddled against the wall, the youngest still calling out for his mother. The worker immediately called 911 while attempting to keep the children from seeing the worst of the bloody scene. The entire violent episode had unfolded in less than 5 minutes, but its consequences would last a lifetime. The 3 Prenell children, aged 6, 4, and 2, witnessed the entire horrific event. Child trauma specialists would later explain that experiencing such extreme violence, particularly when perpetrated by one parent against another, creates profound psychological damage. The oldest child reportedly attempted to intervene, pulling at Danny's leg while screaming, "Stop hurting mommy," an action that demonstrates the impossible position these children were placed in, trying to protect one parent from another. In the immediate aftermath, first responders noted that the children appeared to be in shock, with the oldest repeatedly asking if his mother was going to die. The youngest 2 were described as nearly catatonic, responding minimally to questions or comfort. Child psychologists brought in to evaluate the children would later document symptoms consistent with acute stress disorder, nightmares, emotional numbing, and regression in developmental milestones. The long-term implications for these children are severe. Research shows that witnessing domestic violence, especially extreme incidents like this shooting, significantly increases their risk for developing PTSD, depression, anxiety disorders, and even perpetuating the cycle of violence in their own future relationships. The trauma of that day in the hotel hallway would require years of specialized therapy and support. First responders arrived at the Hampton Inn and Suites at 3:35 p.m., finding a chaotic scene. Paramedics immediately recognized the severity of Gabrielle's injuries. She had lost significant blood from the abdominal wound, which had damaged her liver and small intestine. They stabilized her as best they could before she was airlifted to the University of Mississippi Medical Center in Jackson, the region's leading trauma facility. Doctors would later describe her condition upon arrival as critical but survivable, noting that the quick emergency response had likely saved her life. Danny's self-inflicted wound, while serious, had missed vital organs. He was transported by ambulance to the local hospital, where he underwent surgery and was stabilized within hours. By the following morning, he was conscious and under police guard. Meanwhile, Mississippi Child Protective Services took emergency custody of the 3 traumatized children, placing them temporarily with the foster family specially trained in trauma response. Agency records indicate the children were kept together, a small mercy in an otherwise devastating situation. Back at the hotel, investigators worked through the night, collecting evidence including the handgun, shell casings, and Danny's phone, which would later reveal disturbing search history in the days leading up to the shooting. Just 2 days before the shooting, Danny had posted a family photo on Facebook with the caption, I may not be a perfect man, but I'll always be a family man. This post, juxtaposed with his actions, reveals the dangerous self-justification common among abusers, acknowledging flaws while claiming moral superiority and divine favor despite their violence. The Macomb Police Department responded within minutes of the 911 call, securing the hotel hallway as a crime scene. Detective Vicky Carter, who would later become the chief investigator on the case, described the scene as immediately clear as domestic violence rather than a random attack. Officers collected the weapon, a 9mm handgun registered to Danny, along with 3 shell casings and multiple blood samples for DNA confirmation. Hotel security footage provided crucial evidence, capturing the moments before and after the shooting. Investigators interviewed 17 witnesses, including hotel staff and guests who had heard the argument and gunshots. One witness, staying in the room directly across from where the shooting occurred, reported hearing Danny say, "If I can't have you, no one will," just before the shots were fired. Detectives also seized Danny's phone, which revealed disturbing search history, including queries about gunshot survival rates and Mississippi domestic violence penalties in the days leading up to the incident. This digital evidence suggested premeditation rather than a spontaneous act of rage, significantly changing the potential legal ramifications Danny would face. Gabrielle's injuries were life-threatening and required immediate surgical intervention. The bullet that entered her abdomen had torn through her liver and damaged her small intestine, causing massive internal bleeding. The second bullet had shattered her right humerus, requiring orthopedic reconstruction. Doctors performed emergency surgery lasting over 6 hours, during which Gabrielle received multiple blood transfusions. Her medical team later reported that she had coded twice on the operating table before being stabilized. Danny's self-inflicted wound, while serious, was far less severe. The bullet had entered his right abdomen but missed vital organs, requiring only minimal surgical repair. He was conscious and stable within hours of the surgery, able to speak with investigators by the following morning. Medical staff noted his apparent lack of emotional distress about Gabrielle's condition, documenting his primary concern seemed to be about his own legal situation. On June 23, 2023, just 2 days after the shooting, the Macomb Police Department formally charged Danny Prenell Jr. with aggravated domestic violence, a felony carrying up to 20 years in Mississippi State Prison. Additionally, he was charged with disturbance of a business, a misdemeanor related to the disruption caused at the hotel. Chief Detective Carter told reporters, "These initial charges allow us to hold the suspect while we complete our investigation. Additional charges, potentially including attempted murder, may be forthcoming as we gather more evidence and consult with the district attorney's office." The severity of Gabrielle's injuries and the presence of the children were cited as aggravating factors that could significantly increase Danny's potential sentence if convicted. Danny made his first court appearance on June 25th from his hospital bed via video conference. Looking pale but composed, he pleaded not guilty to both charges. The judge denied bail, citing flight risk and the violent nature of the crime. Danny's attorney, Marcus Williams, issued a brief statement claiming his client was experiencing a mental health crisis at the time of the incident and would be seeking psychological evaluation. By early July, prosecutors had expanded the charges to include 3 counts of child endangerment, 1 for each child present during the shooting. The district attorney's office also indicated they were considering upgrading the primary charge to attempted murder based on witness statements and digital evidence suggesting premeditation. The legal proceedings moved slowly as Gabrielle's recovery took precedence over her ability to testify. A preliminary hearing was scheduled for August 15th, but was postponed when Gabrielle's medical team advised against her participation due to her ongoing physical and psychological trauma. The judge granted a 60-day continuance, with prosecutors indicating they had sufficient evidence to proceed even without Gabrielle's immediate testimony if necessary. The 3 Prenell children remained in emergency foster care for 2 weeks following the shooting. Mississippi Child Protective Services conducted thorough evaluations, working with child psychologists specializing in trauma. By early July, the children had been transferred to the custody of Gabrielle's sister in Louisiana, allowing them to return to familiar surroundings while their mother recovered. Court records indicate that Danny was barred from any contact with the children pending the outcome of his case. Child welfare officials implemented a specialized trauma treatment program for all 3 children, with the oldest showing signs of severe post-traumatic stress disorder. The custody arrangement included provisions for the children to visit their mother in the hospital as her condition stabilized, with therapists present to facilitate these emotionally complex reunions. In the days following the shooting, Bright Morning Star Missionary Baptist Church maintained a conspicuous silence. The church doors remained open for regular services, but Danny's name was immediately removed from their website and social media pages. When reporters contacted church leadership, calls went unanswered or were met with no comment responses. By the second Sunday after the incident, a visiting pastor delivered the sermon without any mention of the Prenell family. This institutional silence spoke volumes to domestic violence advocates, who pointed to it as an example of how religious communities often struggle to address abuse within their ranks. Several church members, speaking anonymously, expressed feeling abandoned and without guidance on how to process what had happened to a family many had looked up to. The church's failure to acknowledge the tragedy left a congregation in limbo, unsure how to support Gabriel while reconciling their pastor's violent actions with the spiritual messages he had delivered. The Pineville community reacted with stunned disbelief as news of the shooting spread. Many residents had seen the Prenells as role models, a young, successful family dedicated to faith and service. "It's like finding out everything you believed was a lie," said one community member who had attended marriage counseling sessions with Danny. Despite the shock, support for Gabrielle quickly mobilized. By the end of June, a GoFundMe campaign for her medical expenses and children's care had raised over $50,000. Local businesses organized fundraisers, and a domestic violence awareness walk held in Pineville on July 15th drew more than 300 participants wearing purple ribbons in Gabrielle's honor. Perhaps most significantly, other domestic violence survivors began coming forward with their own stories, creating what one local advocate called a watershed moment for the community. The Pineville Women's Shelter reported a 30% increase in calls to their helpline in the month following the shooting, suggesting that Gabrielle's tragedy had prompted others to seek help before their situations escalated to violence. Gabrielle's family maintained a protective circle around her during recovery, limiting public statements to brief updates through an appointed spokesperson. Her sister, now caring for the 3 children, released a statement in late July expressing profound gratitude for the community's support while requesting continued privacy. Gabrielle is focused on healing both physically and emotionally. The statement read, "Her primary concern remains her children's well-being. The road ahead is long, but she is surrounded by love and professional support." The family specifically thanked the medical team at University of Mississippi Medical Center and the trauma specialists working with the children, while making no mention of Danny or his family. Media coverage of the Prenell case evolved significantly as more details emerged. Initial reports focused on the shocking juxtaposition of Danny's role as a pastor and his violent actions, often using headlines like "Man of God turns violent" that domestic violence experts criticized for sensationalizing the case. By mid-July, more nuanced reporting began to appear, examining the history of abuse documented in the 2016 protection order and exploring how Danny's positions of authority may have enabled his violence to continue unchecked. Several national outlets produced in-depth pieces on domestic violence in religious communities, using the Prenell case as a launching point for broader discussion. Social media reactions revealed troubling divides, with some commenters questioning Gabrielle's decisions to stay in the relationship, while others defended Danny or suggested the shooting was an isolated incident rather than the culmination of years of abuse. These victim-blaming narratives prompted domestic violence organizations to launch educational campaigns addressing common misconceptions about why victims remain with abusers and the escalating nature of domestic violence. Local news stations in both Louisiana and Mississippi continued following the case closely, providing regular updates on Gabrielle's recovery and the ongoing legal proceedings against Danny, keeping the community engaged with the story long after national attention had moved on. As of today, Gabrielle Prenell continues her long journey toward recovery. After 3 months in the hospital and rehabilitation, she has regained most of her physical function, though she still requires ongoing physical therapy for her injured arm. Emotionally, her healing process is just beginning, with trauma specialists noting that recovery from such profound betrayal and violence typically takes years of dedicated therapeutic work. Danny remains in custody awaiting trial, which is scheduled for early next year. Prosecutors have successfully upgraded the charges to attempted murder, and if convicted, he faces up to 30 years in prison. The Bright Morning Star Missionary Baptist Church has appointed a new pastor and established a domestic violence ministry in what many see as a belated acknowledgement of their former leader's crimes. Meanwhile, Gabrielle and her children have relocated to start fresh in a new community, supported by family and domestic violence advocates who continue to ensure their safety and privacy during this transition. The Prenell case shatters the dangerous myth that domestic violence only happens in certain types of families or communities. Behind the perfect social media posts, behind the respected positions in church and law enforcement, behind the smiling family photos, lay a horrific reality that nearly cost Gabrielle her life. This case reminds us that abusers often cultivate impeccable public images specifically to make allegations against them seem unbelievable. Perhaps most importantly, this tragedy highlights how institutions, churches, law enforcement agencies, and communities can unintentionally shield abusers through silence, disbelief, or misplaced loyalty. When we place certain individuals above suspicion because of their public roles or carefully crafted personas, we create environments where abuse can flourish unchecked. The warning signs were there: the 2016 protection order, the emergency room visits, the controlling behaviors witnessed by friends. Each represented an opportunity for intervention that might have prevented this near-fatal shooting. As a society, we must learn to recognize these red flags regardless of who displays them, understanding that domestic violence crosses all social, economic, and professional boundaries. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel to support our work bringing these important stories to light. Your engagement helps us reach more people who might be experiencing similar situations or know someone who is. Share this video to spread awareness about the often hidden nature of domestic violence. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, help is available. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-SAFE or text START to 88788. Remember, abusers often monitor phone usage, so please reach out safely. No one deserves to live in fear, and with proper support, survivors like Gabrielle can find safety and begin healing.